Today we're going to talk about dot products, which are completely unique to vectors. So we're going to find the dot product of two vectors, and then using the formula for a dot product, we can find the angle between two vectors, and then we can find a vector that's orthogonal to a given vector, and orthogonal just means perpendicular or at a 90-degree angle. So let's just begin with the definition of a dot product. So the dot product of two vectors, which looks like this. So it has a vector, and then it has a really bold, so this is not times, this is not u times v, it's like a dot product, okay, is equal to the absolute value of u times the absolute value of v, all right, and then cosine theta. So we have formulas for all of these guys, right? So this is u is the square root of 8. This right here is going to be the square root of a squared plus b squared, where a and b are part of the vector u. And then this would be the square root of a squared plus b squared, where when a and b comes from vector v. And then this theta is that is the angle, right? The angle in between vector u and vector v. All right, so the dot product has another name. It's also called the inner product. And the reason it's a unique operation is because when you do this operation, instead of getting another vector like all of our other vector operations so far, we're actually going to get a real number and not a vector. So let's practice. Let's find the dot product of u and v, where u is the vector 2, 4, and v is the vector negative 3, 1, and the angle in between u and v is 98.13 degrees. Notice that we're in degrees, so make sure your calculator is in degree mode. So we'll begin with our formula. So to do our formula, we first have to find the absolute value of u, which is the square root of a squared plus b squared. So a is 2. And b is 4. So we have 2 squared plus 4 squared, which is 4 plus 16, which is 20. So we have the square root of 20. That is the absolute value of u. Then we have to find the absolute value of v. So a is negative 3 and b is 1. So we get negative 3 squared plus 1 squared. So 9 plus 1, which is 10. So now that we know the absolute value of u and the absolute value of v, we also need to find the cosine of 98.13. So we're going to multiply the square root of 20 times the square root of 10 times the cosine of 98.13 degrees, making sure our calculator is in degree mode, and then we get approximately negative 2. So here is another definition of dot product. It says that the dot product is a times c plus b times d. So where a and b are from u and c and d are from v. So you're basically multiplying the corresponding pieces together, which is cool. So we're going to do the same vectors using this definition. So that means we're going to do a and c, so 2 times negative 3, and then plus b and d, so 4 times 1. So 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, 4 times 1 is 4, so we get negative 2, which makes sense because it's supposed to be the same. Alright, so now let's find the dot product when the vectors are 3, 4, and 5, 2. So remember, we multiply the first ones together, so the 3 and the 5, and then we add when we multiply the second ones together, the 4 times the 2. So we get 15 plus 8, which is 23. Okay, let's do one more. So 7 times 2 plus 14 times negative 1. So again, it's these two plus times these two. So we end up with 0. Okay, so that last example is an example of something very neat that happens called orthogonal. So vectors u and v are orthogonal if whenever we do the dot product, we get 0. So just like that last example, we got 0. So those two vectors were orthogonal. So what does that mean? Okay, that means that they are perpendicular. Okay, so if two vectors are perpendicular, they are said to be orthogonal. So that means that they're perpendicular, right? So perpendicular vectors have a dot product of 0. So perpendicular vectors meet at 90 degrees. So if you have anything, if your angle is ever 90 degrees, then you know your dot product is going to be 0. So let's say we have 90 degrees, so cosine of 90 degrees is 0. So it doesn't even matter what these two things are because you're going to multiply it by 0, and anything times 0 is 0. Alright, so the formula that we have for dot product, where we have the absolute value of u times the absolute value of v times the cosine of the angle, this is a really helpful formula because we can use that to find the angle between the two vectors. We can use it to find this theta, right? So solving for theta, first we divide both sides by the absolute value of u times the absolute value of v. So now we have cosine theta equals u dot product v over the absolute value of u times the absolute value of v. And then to solve for theta, we just do cosine inverse of each side. So here's the formula. Theta equals cosine inverse u dot product v over the absolute value of u times the absolute value of v. Alright, so let's do some practice problems. Let's find a vector that is orthogonal to the vector u, and u is -4, 2. Okay, so we know that u times v has to be 0, right? So remember, u times v is a times c plus b times d. So the a and the b are -4 and 2, right? So this would be -4 here, and this would be 2 here. So because we want them to equal 0, we can say 0 is equal to -4c. I got the -4 because we know that a is -4, plus 2d, because I know that b is 2. And we want to set this equal to 0 because your dot product has to be 0. So now what I'm going to do is I'll solve. So that means that 4c is equal to 2d, which means that 2c is equal to d. So to find d, all I have to do is multiply c by 2. So what I'm going to do is choose any value for c, okay, and then compute d. So let's say that I pick c equals 1. Well, that means that d is equal to 2 because 2 times 1 is 2. So now that I have a c and a d, I can now write my new vector. It's just 1, 2. And I know that 1, 2 is orthogonal to -4, 2. And we can check it. -4 times 1 is -4, plus 2 times 2 is 4. So -4 plus 4 is 0. All right, now let's find an angle between these two vectors. So remember that, let's start with just finding this dot product. So a times c plus b times d, and we get 22, which is great. Now that we have that, we need to find the absolute value of u and the absolute value of v. So remember, to find the absolute value of u, we have to do a squared plus b squared and then the square root of it. So our a is 2, our b is 6, so we end up with the square root of 40. And then the absolute value of v, so a is -1, b is 4, so -1 squared plus 4 squared is 17. So the absolute value of v is the square root of 17. So now I can plug all of that in to my formula to find the angle. So remember, my angle is equal, cosine of my angle is equal to u dot product v, which we said was 22, over the absolute value of u, which we found to be 40, over the absolute value of v, which we said was the square root of 17. So now I have to do the cosine inverse of each side, and I get 0.847, 22 divided by the square root of 40 times the square root of 17 is 0.8437. So now I'll do cosine inverse of each side, and that means that my theta is equal to 32.5 degrees. Notice that we need to be in degrees whenever we solve problems like this. All right, go ahead and try some problems on your own.